Hello and welcome to Lecture 3. Following on from Lecture 2, which discussed the development of English as a global lingua franca and how it is used today, this lecture introduces language change, variation and the use of English as a global lingua franca. As with Lecture 2, I introduce some key concepts that help us to understand more current language change and variation, and attitudes towards this that will be discussed in later lectures. I begin by looking at language change and the various reasons why languages change, looking at language change in contact. I examine the new Englishes in the outer circle, countries where English is spoken as an official second language. I then examine the use of English around the world and models that have been devised to categorise the world's English speakers. And I end with an examination of how English is used today as a global lingua franca. There is no such thing as a language that isn't changing. All languages are in a constant state of change, which can affect multiple facets including pronunciation, orthography, grammar, vocabulary, and pragmatics, language in use. One of the most important reasons for language change is a degree of contact with speakers of other languages or dialects, and this is particularly the case with English. In addition to diachronic change, language contact can also cause sudden periods of language change, known as synchronic change, which results in the transference of words, sounds and structures from one language to another. As discussed in Lecture 2, in some ways, Standard English is a mixed language with Germanic origins, but has strong contact influences from French, Latin, Old Norse and Celtic languages, and loan words from many other languages. It is important to point out that it is often difficult to determine if an item is a loan word or a result of code mixing or code switching, which is common in multilingual settings. Most languages are in contact with others, but English is so more than any other. It has now become customary to use the plural, Englishes, and central to the world English's paradigm is the acceptance of the fact that English is a dynamic and pluricentric entity. What are often termed the new Englishes resulted from Channel 3 spread outlined in Lecture 2. New Englishes have therefore been shaped by contact with the indigenous languages of the population, where they become localised or nativised by adopting some unique language features. According to Pratt et al., these new Englishes are far from uniform in their characteristics and current use, but they do share certain features. They usually developed through the education system in places where English was not the main language. In these post-colonial territories, English was initially only spoken by the colonisers, but once schools were established and English was used as the medium of instruction, and as time went on, local English teachers were recruited who used varieties of English influenced by their mother tongue, causing the differences to become more widespread. New Englishes are a prime example of contact-based language change. As colonial settlements increased and when these nations subsequently became independent, these varieties became even more distinct. It is clear from the modules so far that what makes English different to other lingua francas in the past is the sheer diversity of people using the language. Such diversity has resulted in varied use of the English language worldwide. Such diversity in the number of speakers of English has also led to a number of attempts to capture and categorise English speakers through various models. These are mostly pluralist constructs that seek to capture the diversity in the English-speaking population. One of the first attempts to categorise the world's English speakers was Streven's World Map of English, first published in 1980. The aim of the upside-down tree diagram superimposed onto a world map is to highlight that the form of English by a certain group does not exist in a vacuum, but exhibits similarities with other varieties of English. It shows, for example, that West African English is more similar to the English spoken in East Africa than in Australia. It also aims to show that every variety of English is aligned with one of the two main branches of English, British and American, and it aims to illustrate the historical and geographical relationships between them and their various children in different parts of the world. The model, however, is quite America-centric in that it positions American English with British English and does not represent the origins of American English in British English. Other Englishes, such as Irish English, which is much older than American English, are relegated to smaller branches, so historical representation is also somewhat confused. This model promotes a stereotype that American English and British English are somehow the fundamental central Englishes of the world, which is certainly not the case. MacArthur's Circle of World English places World Standard English in the centre, or the hub, of a wheel. In this model, the existence of regional varieties is highlighted, including both standard and other forms. And then the 8 regions are represented by various spokes, which encircle the hub. These include the standard and other forms of African English, American English, Canadian English, and Irish English. Beyond these, but linked to them by spokes marking off 8 regions of the world, are the sub-varieties, such as Aboriginal English, Ugandan English, and Singaporean English. While this is a tidy attempt at illustrating the world's Englishes based on geographical location, it is not indicative of the true historical, political, and linguistic ties that exist in the variety of English represented. For example, Hong Kong English has much more in common historically, politically, and linguistically with British English than Japanese English, which is included in the same category. The same could be said for the Philippines, which is much closer to American English due to its historical development than to Chinese English. In Kakru's 3-circle model, varieties of English, or countries in which it is used, are presented as 3 overlapping circles, labelled the inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circle. This classification largely follows the categorization of ENL, ESL, and EFL speakers discussed previously. This model has been very influential in raising awareness of the existence of different Englishes, and the terms are commonly used today. Despite its usefulness, it is important, however, to note that the model is flawed in a number of aspects. For example, it fails to account for those native English speakers, inner circle speakers, living in ESL or EFL territories. With increased international mobility, English speakers can be found all over the world. There are also increasing number of international students, for example, in native English-speaking countries, and also increasingly all over the world as a result of the growth in EMI in higher education. Thus, by focusing on historical events rather than the sociolinguistic uses of English, the model does not give a realistic picture of how the English language is used today. The model is also problematic when we think about the use of English as a lingua franca, which operates both within and across all of these 3 circles. In sum, English speakers today do not fit nicely into one of these 3 circles, and globalization, migration, and the prevalence of computer-mediated communication amongst people around the globe have changed the nature of interaction in English. And this is particularly true of English as a lingua franca, which does not fit neatly into the model at all. Given the global use of English as a lingua franca, some scholars have posed questions such as, how do people who speak different varieties of English and people whose level of English may be low communicate with each other using English as a lingua franca? And, notwithstanding the different varieties being used, are there any shared or distinctive linguistic features in the Englishes used by these people? Interest in the use of English as a contact language between speakers from all of CACRU's circles has grown within the English as a lingua franca research paradigm. Here, researchers examine the more fluid ways English is used as a lingua franca by speakers from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. ELF can be understood as any use of English among speakers of different first languages for whom English is a communicative medium of choice and often the only option. Unlike the new Englishes discussed in the previous lecture, there is no focus on fixed speech communities, geography, or on identifying core features. So that concludes Lecture 3, where we've looked at language change and the reasons why languages change. I examined the use of English around the world and also models that have been devised to categorise the world's English speakers. We also looked at how English is used today as a global lingua franca. Thank you very much for watching.